For over a century, the legendary tales that have surrounded our great British airfields have inspired generations of people, including me, which is why I am on a personal mission to cross the UK to visit some of our most important airfields, to understand not just about their contribution to our past, but importantly, how many of them have helped define our future. From the UK's first flight, through to groundbreaking innovations such as carbon fibre and the jet engine, and the extraordinary effort spent on preserving our aviation heritage. Join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have helped shape Britain and the world. This is Stow-Marys in Essex, and it is the most complete surviving example of a First World War aerodrome anywhere in Britain. Many of its original structures survive, a good number of which are being lovingly restored to give us a fascinating insight into the UK's first pilots during those heady days of early military aviation. Stow-Marys life as an active aerodrome was incredibly brief. It lasted only 3 years between 1916 and 1919. But the pilots based here really were the pioneers of aerial combat. And when you think about it, they were tasked with taking a technology barely 10 years old to war. At the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, Britain really had only about 90 military aircraft, and they were used for reconnaissance. The airfields they used were pretty simple affairs, just like this one. Grass strips with a scattering of buildings and tents upon them. As far as the British government were concerned, the idea of using aircraft as weapons hadn't really occurred to them. Hello, Trevor.
How'd you do?
Good to see you, mate.
Yeah, you too, you too.
Trevor, when we look back over a century to the beginning of the First World War, it's hard to imagine a time when aircraft didn't have a combat role, but in 1914, that wasn't the case.
You've got to look back and sort of remember that it is 100 years ago. They were working with the technology that they had at the time. Most of the aircraft which were available, not just to the military, were very, very rudimentary. Powered flight had only been achieved around 10 years beforehand when the Wright brothers first took to the air. And many of the aircraft were literally kites with engines. And they weren't really built for that sort of role.
Here at Stow-Marys, we've got a fantastic example of a First World War aerodrome. But the infrastructure that the RFC had to rely upon was pretty basic, wasn't it?
It was. Obviously, deploying aircraft to a combat area is one thing, but you know, England itself, the UK mainland, was not really, I don't think, perceived as being under threat from the air. And really the airfields in England were perhaps geared towards training. They were geared towards the logistics of moving aircraft around, delivering them to squadrons, sort of aircraft parks such as Farnborough. So no, we are very much in the days before people thinking about home defence and building airfields in the UK to destroy or prevent incoming bomber raids.
However, German forces realised early the destructive potential of aerial warfare, employing not only aeroplanes but also airships, most famously Zeppelins. The Germans began bombing British cities in January 1915 with these titans of the sky.
During the First World War, there was a significant amount of damage caused in air raids. However, very little of that is visible to this day. Much heavy bombing in World War II meant that much of London has been rebuilt in the intervening years. However, here in Lincoln's Inn, there is still some tangible evidence of one of those first early air raids caused by a Zeppelin. On the night of the 13th of October 1915, a Zeppelin commanded by Captain Lieutenant Johann Breithaupt appeared over London and dropped his first bomb over Charing Cross Station. A few minutes later, a bomb landed here in Lincoln's Inn and landed right on the point on the ground there, marked by that marker. The blast, while it didn't kill anyone, sent out fragments of shrapnel all over the walls here, and you can still see where that shrapnel has gouged out holes. The blast from the bomb also smashed a 17th century stained glass window up above there. Although no one was killed here, a total of 47 people were killed in London that night. While the Germans hoped to create panic in the streets of Britain with their bombing campaign, in many cases it was actually the complete opposite. People were fascinated by this wholly new experience. Many people had never seen an aeroplane, certainly never seen an airship. Then actually spotting Zeppelins became a bit of a spectator sport. There was something fascinating by looking up into the sky and seeing a silver Zeppelin illuminated by these sweeping searchlights with shells bursting all around like twinkling stars. A Zeppelin attack had a certain unreal beauty all of its own. Although the Germans tried to create the impression that they were doing accurate bombing, really bomb aiming techniques at this time were quite unsophisticated, and really once you got over central London, the idea was to just release your bombs in a regular pattern and hope you hit something significant.
Zeppelins were giant hydrogen-filled airships, with the biggest during World War I reaching 650 feet in length. They weighed 34 tons and could carry 1.5 to 3 tons of bombs. The Zeppelins were the largest combat aircraft ever to have flown. The German bombing raids were not as effective as they'd hoped, but they still caused significant damage and casualties, with some 500 people killed in raids across Britain.
The Dolphin Pub, Red Lion Street, Bloomsbury in central London. Here, on the 8th of September 1915, another air raid called Devastating Damage. A bomb landed at the front entrance to this pub, blasted out a whole glass frontage and killed a local man who was standing by the door at the time. But a clock that was on the wall in the pub that day was shattered by the blast, and its hands stopped at the time of detonation at 10:49 in the evening. That clock is still on the wall now. The hands have dropped a little, time has had an effect, and they now show 10:40, but it is the original clock that stopped working in that air raid of the 8th of September 1915. These Zeppelin raids on Britain caused an unexpected impact, in so much that rather than panic setting in, people were incensed by these raids. The German Zeppelins became known as the baby killers. And what it saw after every single raid, there was a dramatic increase in the number of people wanting to join up the army. So rather than working against Britain, it actually had an effect of creating more recruits for the army, something that the German commanders had never anticipated. Another interesting reaction to these Zeppelin raids was the amount of picture postcards that were produced, and people seemed to have an insatiable desire for them. These postcards showed dramatic images of Zeppelins being shot down, exploding in the air, and even in fact, much to general surprise, there was a very popular range of comic postcards with people joking about these Zeppelin raids.
Although the Zeppelin attacks were not going to win the war for the Germans, the British couldn't stand by while the enemy dropped bombs with impunity.
I think the government response basically was that they had to do something. There would have been mounting public pressure to actually respond and do something positive to stop or at least disrupt these raids. Specifically with regards to the Zeppelin raids, it was to build airfields and a home defence network, including such places as Stomaris, where we are now.
So this arose because of the Zeppelin threat?
Absolutely, yes, directly. Part of sort of home defence wing of the Royal Flying Corps, which was put in place to disrupt or destroy these incoming raids. Stomaris is on the River Blackwater. The River Blackwater is a big river. It's a navigational aid to aircraft in the air. So you can follow the Blackwater right to your target, which might be London. Same with the River Thames. So you have squadrons based where they think they're going to be most useful.
These days, of course, airships are pretty unfamiliar to most of us. But it's interesting to think that this entire establishment was born out of a fear of them.
It was not only a fear, it was a very, very real threat. But Stomaris continued to be relevant because as that threat of the Zeppelin subsided, it was superseded by multi-engined aircraft such as the Gotha, big German bombers, coming over the country to continue the work that had been started by the Zeppelins. So Stomaris was here to deal with that.
In 1916, the Home Defence Wings were formed and began patrolling the skies around London, but they were just part of a much more extensive defence system that was rapidly being put into place. While David Henderson, head of the Royal Flying Corps, oversaw the construction of airfields around London, Admiral Sir Percy Scott started the implementation of gun rings around the capital. Until late 1915, London's air defence had consisted of 3 outdated guns placed on Whitehall buildings. They did give some protection to the seat of government, but by the middle of World War I, this began to change. By 1917, Britain at last had a decent air defence system consisting of anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, aircraft and a centralised command system. But crucially, the Royal Flying Corps were also about to get their hands on a vital ingredient in the fight against the Zeppelin: incendiary bullets. Dave.
Hi, Jules.
How are you, sir? Nice to see you.
And to you, sir.
Look at that, that's a beauty.
Yep.
Tell us what we're looking at here.
First World War Vickers machine gun. Standard 303 machine gun of the British Army in the First World War.
Now, you would think that shooting down an enormous airship with a machine gun like that would be a fairly straightforward operation.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But it's not quite that straightforward. The problem is inside a structure of a Zeppelin, you have cells, sort of represented like this black bag here. That's basically what it is. Several of these cells inside the airship structure.
And they're full of hydrogen?
These are full of hydrogen. They support a skeleton frame, which has got a skin over it. And these little bullets passing through there, it's so small, they are so tiny. All you're going to get is very, very slow leaks. It's even slower than a slow leak on your car tyre. It's just too small to make any real difference to that cell.
I mean, obviously this is a representation of a hydrogen cell from a Zeppelin, but
yeah,
this
it's somewhat underscaled.
A genuine 303
That's
round.
a genuine 303 round, standard ball round.
You're right, it doesn't look like it's man enough to do the job at all, does it?
No, and if you can imagine this cell being the size of this room, travelling through there,
wow.
And that's one cell.
Now, the experiment today is going to illustrate how hard it was to shoot down a Zeppelin, and importantly, how we managed to tackle the challenge head on. What's at the end of the range there? That looks like a camping tent.
Well, that's our Zeppelin down there, but inside we've got our hydrogen cells.
And what effect do you think these are going to have?
What do you think?
Is it going to go bang?
We'll see.
We will. And we get to fire this, well, beautiful antique Vickers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right then, let's have a look.
OK. What we're going to do is you're going to fire it, and you're going to put a 10-round burst into that tent, and you'll just see what happens.
In one go?
In one go.
Right.
Right, let's do it. Gun is live, air defender's on.
OK.
In your own time, go on.
Wow.
OK, clear the gun.
That was amazing, actually. It's a weapon of real presence, isn't it?
It really is.
It thuds away there. You can see how effective they were in the trenches, but also in the air. But has it done the business at the far end? Because the tent's still there. There was no big bang. Let's have a look. Well, it hasn't made as much of a mess as I thought it would, to be honest. Little spots there, aren't there?
Soft skin. Let's have a quick look around, see what happened to the cells inside.
Oh, look, there's a little tear there. That is a bit more dramatic. And hopefully in here is our mock-up hydrogen cell. Oh, there.
Well, there you go. It's obviously got holes in it, and you can feel it coming out there.
So that demonstrates perfectly that a normal round, a normal bullet, really isn't going to destroy a Zeppelin in the way that we might have imagined.
Not.
The incendiary round is the thing that really turns the tide against the Zeppelin. Why?
What happens there, you've got a burning element. It's a tracer, basically. That burning element is obviously spitting bits of spark out behind it. Now you've punctured the inner and outer envelopes of the Zeppelin. What's going to happen is the gases are going to mix. You've now got an ignition source, and once you hit that with 2 or 3 of these rounds, you're going to get an explosion.
So if we were to fill these once again
and
fire a tracer round at it, that would be quite dramatic.
I think you find it's a lot more dramatic.
Shall we?
Now let's try it.
Okay.
Okay. Gun is live.
Okay.
Eyes and ears on.
Safety catch off. Wow. Okay.
A little bit high.
A little bit low, yeah. There you go. That's right through the middle.
Okay.
Okay, here we go then. That was astonishing. The shockwave from the explosion at the other end of the range has come barrelling up this concrete tunnel.
So now you know what it's like to shoot at something that is very explosive in gas.
And that was a tiny, tiny target.
Yes.
Imagine hitting a full-blown Zeppelin.
Yes, when you hit hydrogen, it's going to burn very rapidly. So you're going to see the cells just keep burning and burning, and hydrogen normally burns invisibly.
Well, Dave, that has been a fascinating insight and a real demonstration of just how effective experimental history, experimental archaeology can be in understanding the challenges of the past and how best they were overcome. Well done, you.
No, well done you. You hit the target.
The continuing success of Britain's defences forced the Germans to reconsider their bombing strategy. By mid-1917, the Germans had lost almost half of their airships and began to predominantly use Gotha bombers instead. In 1916, there were still 126 airship raids on the UK, with only 28 raids by aeroplanes. That statistic drastically reversed in 1917, with 341 aeroplane raids and only 30 by airships. By replacing standard bullets with ones that burned and could ignite the flammable gas in the Zeppelin, the British were able to defeat the world's first strategic bombing campaign. The pilots here at Stowe-Murray's were taking on the Zeppelins and the Gotthas in essentially reconnaissance aircraft, but over the front lines in France, a completely new machine was beginning to dominate the air war: the fighter. Whilst repurposed reconnaissance aircraft based here at Stowe-Murray's may have been sufficient in attacking large, slow-moving targets such as Zeppelins and Gotha bombers, a whole new type of aircraft was needed to counter the enemy's growing aviation developments. At the start of World War I, the RFC deployed various aeroplanes including BE-2s and Avro 504s. These aeroplanes were only seen as useful for observation and reconnaissance. With a crudely attached machine gun or armed with explosive darts, these aircraft would later be used against Zeppelins. But when it came to evading and attacking other aeroplanes, these stable, slow aircraft had no chance.
The aeroplane here, the Avro 504, was probably one of the best training aircraft that we developed during the First War. It was also ideal as a reconnaissance aeroplane. You could have a pilot and an observer in the airplane. That observer would be either taking notes, or he would taking photographs, or in some cases was using simple radio to relay information to the ground.
Their task was to observe the enemy, scouting artillery locations, trench positions and troop movements. Toward the beginning of the war, these aircraft could go about their business relatively unopposed.
So most early reconnaissance airplanes were unarmed. It may be that the observer carried a revolver, but generally speaking, the idea was to go and observe the enemy without having to concern yourself with defending your own aeroplane.
The effectiveness of these reconnaissance flights meant that some pilots began to feel that it might be wise to try and down the enemy aircraft.
The guns were initially issued to the officers for self-defence if they went down. Only after they started, the Germans started it apparently, taking pot shots at the British trying to take photographs. The British actually complained to the German High Command and said, this is not on, we're trying to take photographs, we're all officers, and your guys, you're meant to be Prussian officer corps, are shooting at us, how rude. The German response was just to shoot back more. I mean, it's war at the end of the day. Once the British understood that, that's when the arms race really started then. In this drawer we have probably the first weapon used in aerial combat, although it wasn't designed as a weapon, is a flare pistol. But at some point, some bright spark thought, fires a distress flare, incendiary, planes are made of wood and canvas. I wonder what happens if I fire it at a plane. Bang. So that was probably the first weapon ever to be used in aerial combat. It didn't work, but that's what started it all really. The standard British pistol at the time, or the most common, was a Webley revolver. It's reliable, there's nothing to go wrong. For a pilot who's controlling an aircraft, point and shoot. It's a heavy bullet, it will go through canvas, it will go through wood, which the planes were made of. There's not a single recorded instance of a plane or a pilot being downed or injured or anything with a handheld weapon. You're in a plane, it's vibrating, it's juddering, there's 200 mile an hour winds rushing past you, you're freezing, you're choking on the fumes. Someone's trying to kill you. Just doesn't happen. When they worked out that the pistols really weren't cutting the mustard, they moved over then to, well, let's take up the rifles. They're powerful rifles. So we have something like the British standard short magazine, the Enfield. It's an excellent weapon. It's a 10-round magazine, a bullet that has a range of a mile in the ideal conditions. It'll go through a brick wall, it'll go through a tree. But you put the magazine in, you load the weapon, bang. How are you going to fly the plane? Again, not a single recorded incidence of it being an effective weapon with regards to aerial combat. As an infantry weapon, fantastic.
The enemy very rapidly realised that they could protect their forces by denying that reconnaissance. The Germans developed aeroplanes with the specific purpose of shooting down reconnaissance aeroplanes. We realised very rapidly that this was beginning to happen. Designers back in the UK knew what they had to do. They had to produce more manoeuvrable aeroplanes and aeroplanes that were more sensible in terms of operating machine guns.
The pistols don't work, the rifles don't work. What do we use? The machine gun is the obvious choice. Rapid rate of fire, fires a rifle bullet, high destructive power. The British opted for the Lewis gun, great gun, 47-round magazine, fires the powerful 303 cartridge, but you've got a propeller and you don't want to hit a propeller because if you do, the plane falls out of the air, no point. So what the British did was they mounted the Lewis gun up high above the pilot. They tried putting it on the wings, which bent the wing.
What was really needed was a gun mounted in front of the pilot, which could fire without hitting the propeller. In July 1915, the Germans were the first to achieve it, using an interrupter or synchronization gear on their Fokker Eindecker. The propeller and the machine gun were synchronized in order to ensure the machine gun would only fire when the propeller blade was not passing in front of the gun's barrel. It gave the Germans a huge advantage, and it took the Allies over a year to catch up and develop their own system.
So the British then moved over to the Vickers. Heavy machine gun fires from a closed bolt mechanism, which means it's much more easy to develop an interrupter system for a plane.
By the autumn of 1916, Britain had finally developed its own interrupter gear, enabling them to mount a Vickers gun right in front of the pilot.
So once the British finally had the hydraulic interrupter mechanism sorted, they had the Vickers heavy machine gun, the air-cooled version, a fantastic weapon. Pilots who at last had a system they could trust and use and come off of the Lewis and the Foster mount and have a weapon which was mounted in front, which they could get behind, instinctively fly the plane, get behind the weapon, fire, engage the enemy.
This breakthrough, along with all the experience gained from the early part of the war, enabled British engineers to begin producing purebred fighters, culminating with the SE-5A.
It was really the epitome of fighting aeroplanes. It was well armed, it was easy to fly and very fast. The aeroplane has a much shorter wing than the training aeroplanes. Aerodynamically it's cleaner. Now you've got something that's going to go fast. The guns pointed in the same direction as the aeroplane. So you could literally use the flying machine as a flying gun. So by the end of the war, aircraft had developed for specific roles. We had bombers and we had fighters and we had trainers. In 4 years of the First World War, we've gone from big, simple aeroplanes through to small, powerful fighters with good controls that really were the way forward.
Now, the invention of the interrupter gear gave rise to the iconic dogfight, which tested both pilots and machines to their very limits. It also, of course, meant that pilots had to figure out some pretty tricky manoeuvres to both escape and attack the enemy. Manoeuvres I'm getting a real taste for in this gorgeous tiger moth. She's an absolute beauty.
Oh, she is.
Now, clearly
Move that.
a little bit younger than the First World War, but to all intents and purposes, it's the same technology.
It's the same sort of thing. It's the same design, open cockpit biplane. and just as manoeuvrable as they were in the First World War.
Now, the advent of the dogfight and its relation to the invention of the interrupter gear is, I suppose, perhaps the most iconic element of the air war during the First and the Second World War.
It is really, yes. Yeah, that's right. Everything they learned in the dogfights of the First World War, they transcribed, the Germans especially, into the Second War.
But the manoeuvres that would have been required would have put even more pressure on those early airframes.
Oh yes, they would have done, but the airframes were fairly strong, especially for turning and looping manoeuvres like that. They could cope very well. What they couldn't cope with was high-speed dives. In fact, it wasn't until the advent of the Spad, which was a French aircraft, and then the British SE-5 and the Camel came along, that it was strong enough to take that sort of pressure.
But I dare say many pilots were lost figuring that out.
Let's face it, if you've got someone on your tail and you can't out-turn him, you're going to try and dive to get away from him. And just hope your aeroplane holds together.
Now, the dogfight demands some extraordinary manoeuvres from pilots. Give us an idea of, say, the top 3 that were necessary that we could experience today.
The key manoeuvre, the one that everyone knows, of course, is the Immelmann turn, where you've got a target aircraft here, and you come down and attack from behind. And for a long time, people thought the Immelmann turn was a loop with a roll off the top going back this way, and then he dived down there. But the aeroplane that Immelmann had, a Fokker Rheindecker, only had wing warping instead of ailerons. So it hadn't got the roll control to do that rolling manoeuvre.
Okay.
And we suspect what he probably did was pulled up and did a big wing over like that.
And then kind of slid back through the air.
Yeah, back down around this way. So I'll demonstrate that to you, and we'll see how that looks.
So the Immelmann turn is the first. What's next?
The other one was the brake into the steep turn to come round sideways into him that way.
So you fired your guns, or rather he's firing at you.
Yeah, or you fired at him once, you've gone past him and round like that, and then he'll try and turn to get on your tail, and you've turned inside him to try and get inside him. So you've got the 2 aircraft going round and round in a circle like this. And the aircraft that can turn the tightest is the one that's going to get on the tail of the other one and shoot him down.
And the third one?
The third one was literally the brake, where you're flying along, you're bounced by someone else, and you brake away from him. You brake inside him.
Wow.
Part of the technique.
Fascinating. And you've got all of this sky to play with today.
Yes, indeed.
So 3 big manoeuvres we're going to have a go at. It's going to be pretty chilly up there. It's very cold down here on the ground.
Yes. Let's go and get wrapped up.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Right,
and then we'll go and do it. Okay.
I'm about to take to the air in a biplane that's over 80 years old to experience not 1, but 3 dogfighting manoeuvres from the First World War.
Well, set, contact. Look at that, first pull. What a good old pull. And away we go. That was great.
It's incredible to be flying over this unique First World War airfield. So that is a Zeppelin's eye view of their route to North London. That's amazing.
So the first two will be the wing over. Yep. Okay. Then we're going to the steep turn. And then after that, the brake. Right. Okay. Alright. Right, full power.
Oh my God! Whoa! Yep. And
Right down, another one.
I have the utmost admiration for those early pilots. I mean, just the business of flying, let alone avoiding or catching the enemy, just astonishing, really.
Go into the steep turn.
Okay. So we're trying to. Oh, there's a G. Oh, there it is. There it is. Yep. Yep, there it is. Absolutely on a sixpence. Oh my God. That was a steep turn.
Next one is the brake.
Okay.
That is a bit more of a violent manoeuvre. Okay, we're flying along. Okay, violent manoeuvre. Aircraft coming at us from the right. Okay, braking right now.
Whoa! Oh my God. There's a G. Yep. I cannot begin to imagine what it was like having to execute those manoeuvres whilst the enemy was on your tail. There we
we are. Power's coming off. We are gliding down to this wonderful, ancient and oh so historic airfield of Stow-Maries.
Wow, well, Chris, if I can just loosen my harness. Astonishing, mate. But how pilots were able to execute those manoeuvres at far greater speed, taking far more risks than we were, whilst trying to attack and escape the enemy.
And they had no armour plating or anything, all they had was a sheet of canvas protecting them.
Well, that wing overall, the Immelmann turn, he certainly deserves to put his name to that one.
It did indeed.
The only thing we haven't done yet, mate, is have a cup of tea.
That's the best thing you've said so far. Let's go and do it.
In many ways, aircraft were developing faster than the knowledge of how to fly them. All the pilots that lost their lives flying at Stow-Maries did so in accidents, but some did survive the war and went on to become legends. This is the grave of Claude Ridley. He once was the commanding officer here. He died in 1942, a much decorated and feted officer, but he chose to be buried here amongst his former colleagues.
Although not as famous as some of the other British pilots, aces like Edward Mannock, James McCudden or Albert Ball, Claude Ridley's flying career was spectacular.
He had been wounded in the foot in aerial combat and he was brought back to this country to recuperate, and as part of that recuperation he'd gone down to a small airfield called Joyce Green. While he was there and on patrol one evening, he found a Zeppelin returning from a raid on London along the Thames, and he managed to engage that Zeppelin with some machine gun fire. It gradually deflated and ended up in the North Sea. So for that, he was awarded the Military Cross. When he had recuperated, he was sent back out to France. He was part of the cadre of that, of officers, experienced officers, and the part of their duties was to drop spies behind enemy lines. He would normally reconnoitre an area the day before, knowing where the spy had to go. He'd pick a spy up and then he would fly him across the lines, find the area that he reconnoitred the day before, drop the spy off, and that was the end of his mission. On the last occasion that he was able to do that, he found that the engine on his aircraft failed, so both he and his spy on board had to escape across the whole of occupied Belgium. He made copious notes on what was going on behind German lines. He was captured briefly on a tram in Belgium, but managed to escape from his guard again. He jumped from first floor windows when the Germans were coming in the bottom ground floor, and it was a whole boy's own adventure, escape. For all that information that he brought back, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order. He also got a private audience with King George V. When he came here to take over the Home Defence flight at Stow-Maries, he was still 6 weeks short of his 20th birthday. So effectively he was commanding the aerodrome and a whole flight at that stage, aged 19, having already been awarded the Distinguished Service Order and the Military Cross.
Many First World War pilots from all sides of the conflict became celebrities. Their endeavours seemed more alluring than those of their compatriots on the ground.
The hero worship throughout the beginning of the First World War started because aviation was such a new subject. The young men that did it appeared to be dashing, especially the fighter pilots, and a whole series of myths surrounded what they were doing because nobody really understood it. The most famous example that everyone accepts now is von Richthofen. His legend grew very quickly during the war because the Germans saw a huge propaganda use for it. With the news coming back from the trenches being so utterly appalling and the casualties in the trenches, I think there was a chance for the propaganda machine on all sides to kick in and pick on a subject that would take the public's mind possibly away from that. But if you can wrap it up in this aura of gentlemanliness and being knights of the air, it has a much greater resonance with the public than talking about sitting in the trench and the mere slaughter of what was going on.
You know, wandering around Stow-Maries, you get a real sense of the ghosts of yesteryear. Take this place. This looks like a pretty innocuous farm building, and in many ways, that's what it became when the airfield actually closed down, but this used to be the officers' mess. Try and imagine it with a beautiful veranda out here, and of course, including much more salubrious surroundings than it does today. This, believe it or not, was the bar. Look, there's one of the original doors still on its hinges. Through there was the dining room, complete with fireplace in here. You can imagine some of the parties that this room would have seen and heard during its years of occupation. And then through here, through what would have been a lovely set of French doors, is a room that I think is particularly moving. This was the quiet room of the mess. This was a place where pilots could come and reflect on their day-to-day lives and, of course, on the dangers they were facing and, I suppose, on many of their friends that they had lost during the campaign. All of this is due to be conserved, and it's worth it because so much of it does survive. Look, the original ceiling, the beams, that lovely Dutch brick fireplace. But my goodness me, what a job it is.
Stowe-Mare's location was deemed unsuitable for a World War II airfield, and it was abandoned. Its buildings were used for agricultural purposes, and nature began to take over. In 2009, the site was auctioned and bought by Russell Savory and his business partner, with the promise that they would restore it to its former glory.
Right, what we've got here, Jules, is the washroom. So got the original top for this, but we just removed it, but that would have had the wooden top there, the lovely little porcelain hand wash basins with the Royal Flying Corps emblem on.
And presumably up here, lots of coat hooks.
Yeah, it would have been the coats, yeah, absolutely. And then coming through into here, we've got the bathroom. So 4 bars, you've got one over there, one there and there. Yeah. And then we have the partitioning. We've got a little bit of the pipe work. And we've also got the boiler room, which is next door.
What's remarkable is that you can absolutely see this place 100 years ago, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. It is just a fantastic story. And with these buildings, I just treat them as a book. You know, they've all got a fantastic story to tell, each individual building, all 22 of them.
But how did you first discover Stowe-Mare's?
It was the internet and looking for a workshop premises. And it said old aerodrome for sale, which obviously my ears pricked up at that, and came to visit it. Fell in love with it in 5 minutes flat. And there a journey started for the conservation of the aerodrome.
But did you then realise that you were letting yourself in for a huge conservation project?
It's a bigger project than I've ever done before, but it is very well worthwhile to tell the history of the Royal Flying Corps, the importance of that. Much is known about trench warfare and the sacrifices made there, but not so much is known about the Royal Flying Corps and these pioneers of early flight and the problems and things that they had with their aircraft failing and that sort of thing. So it's very important that we keep that part of the history going.
But Russell, I have been constantly astonished as to how much of this aerodrome still survives. I mean, it's languished here for 100 years, and I get the feeling that it's sort of been waiting for the right man, the right opportunity to come along, and now you're it.
Thank you. It's going to be a fairly large project, and I think I'm just looking at it as the Johnny Cash song, really, which is one piece at a time, so you don't get too overwhelmed by it.
But when this is done, when it's finally conserved, will it be as sumptuous and as elegant as it might have been once upon a time?
Yeah, this officer's mess is going to be the jewel in the crown that we have. And there's one favourite room back here I'd like to take you to.
Please do, yeah. You can take me around here all day long.
Right, yeah.
That's brilliant.
So what we got here is, that was the main entrance into the mess from the officers' quarters. So it'd been very busy through this corridor.
So this was the main sort of spine of the building?
It is indeed, yes, coming through into the dining room. And my favourite little room, really, of the whole building. So this is the mess orderly's office here, and all the guys would have been coming up here and signing their mess bills.
I mean, unusual to have a kind of sash window inside. In a way, we've caught it at a moment in time, haven't we? Because it looks like it's open for business. And there, an original desk?
And we have one in the back as well, so a nice little back office there. And the reason this is important, because this is a part of the building that I bring some of the relatives to that are of older pilots, because all of their officer pilots would have been in front of this window and signing their mess orderly chit.
You can kind of taste the atmosphere here. I know it wasn't operational for very long, but it's so complete. It's such a time capsule.
Yeah, it is indeed. I mean, that's why we have to keep it. We've got 22 original buildings here now. There were 51 buildings in total, so a majority of those were wooden buildings, so they will just be erected.
Yeah.
They are going to be exactly as they were. We have the original drawings. We managed to get drawings of the hangars from Hendon, so they will be done exactly as they were.
But when it's finished, Russell, this will be a mecca for anyone interested in First World War aviation, not just in Britain, but I guess in Europe as well.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we will have aircraft here which will fly, so they won't be just purely museum pieces, Camels, SC5s, BE2s, and we have actually some of those coming shortly. So it's going to be an absolutely fantastic place, a jewel in the crown, I think, for the UK. You'll have many people coming from Europe, and indeed America as well.
You've got plenty to do.
We have. Let's get on with it.
All right.
Russell's plan is to first restore the existing brick buildings needing immediate attention before constructing the wooden buildings, including hangars. These hangars will house operational World War I aircraft, which will complete Stowe-Mary's resurrection.
Stowe-Mary's is an inspiring and poignant reminder of those early days of military aviation, and of course of the men and the machines that laid the foundations for its future. At the outbreak of war, we possessed just 90 aircraft. By its end, 4 years later, over 20,000 had been produced. And in recognising the value of aircraft as weapons of war, just 7 months before the end of the conflict, in 1918, the RAF was formed. And the rest, as they say, is history. For over a century, the legendary tales that have surrounded our great British airfields have inspired generations of people, including me, which is why I am on a personal mission to cross the UK to visit some of our most important airfields, to understand not just about their contribution to our past, but importantly, how many of them have helped define our future. From the UK's first flight, through to groundbreaking innovations such as carbon fibre and the jet engine, and the extraordinary effort spent on preserving our aviation heritage. Join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have helped shape Britain and the world. The age of the long-range bomber is arguably over, as missiles and smaller multi-role aircraft have taken its place, but the story of the RAF bomber itself is a long and illustrious one, and few airfields are as perhaps connected to that story as here, RAF Coningsby. First opened in 1940, it's played a key role in the frontline defence of the United Kingdom for over 70 years. Perhaps the most famous British bomber of all time was the Avro Lancaster. No bomber before it or since has been as successful, and at the end of the Second World War, the head of Bomber Command, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, wrote to the makers Avro. I should say this to those who put that shining sword in our hand. Without your genius and your efforts, we would not have prevailed, for I believe the Lancaster to be the greatest single factor in winning the war. Today, there is only one left flying in Britain, and it's here at RAF Coningsby. Roger.
Hello, Jules.
Very nice to see you.
Pleasure to meet you.
I'm like a child in a sweet shop. This is the most incredible hangar. It's full of one of everything I would ever want to take home with me. The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight is such an institution. How did it come about?
A group of guys decided that there should be something that celebrated the Battle of Britain and to remember those brave few that gave their lives for the country. So there was 4 Spitfires started the flight, and then from there onwards it's grown and grown and grown. So now we have 2 Hurricanes, 6 Spitfires, Dakota, Lancaster and 2 Chipmunks.
Being surrounded by this fabulous collection, it's hard and unfair in a way to try and pick a favourite, but I'm going to stick my neck out now. For me, the most iconic aircraft of the Second World War has to be the Lancaster, and you get to fly it. What made it so special?
As you say, she is an iconic shape in the sky, iconic sound of 4 Merlins as well. We needed a heavy bomber to accomplish what the other bombers weren't doing. It was sort of born out of a design which was the Manchester first off, which wasn't a very successful aircraft. It had lots of problems and it was plagued with all sorts of troubles. Roy Chadwick, who designed it, then said, actually what we need to do is get more power to it and make it bigger and beef it up, and then it'll be exactly the machine you want.
Well, I am itching to take a closer look. You're the best man to show me around, Roger.
Come on in and welcome to the Lanc.
That is amazing. So, remind me of the crew. How many?
Working from the back then, you have the tail gunner right at the back.
Yep.
Then the mid-upper.
Yep.
Then working forward, you've got a signaller.
Yep.
As well. And then you have the flight deck crew of air engineer, navigator and pilot. And then forward of that, you've got a bomb aimer as well. And the bomb aimer would double up sometimes as the forward gunner as well.
The thing that strikes me, Roger, is that I'm wearing civilian clothes. I'm not wearing a wartime flying suit or a parachute. The idea of trying to move through this fuselage in a hurry to try and rescue a friend, or indeed operate a piece of machinery, or indeed bail out, it's hard to imagine, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and it's a tight space. It's it's a small space because the business of this aircraft is all about the bombs and the weapons. So as you can see, it's quite big on the outside, but very small on the inside. Just as something of interest is that the distance from the ammo box to the tail gunner is 9 yards. So the expression of giving the full 9 yards comes from a length of ammo being shot by the tail gunner.
I love stories like that. It's the sort of thing I remember long into my dotage. But keeping this aircraft in the air is an enormous challenge. You're having to revisit and relearn many of those tricks and skills that maintenance crews would have taken as second nature, I suppose, 70 odd years ago.
There's obviously going to be elements of skill fade, but the person who you really want to speak to is one of our engineers. Jules, let me introduce you to Gary, one of our engineers. Gary, it's Jules.
Pleased to meet you.
Gary, nice to see you. This is fabulous. This is proper engineering. Are these genuine blueprints?
They are genuine blueprints, yeah.
So he gets to fly it and occasionally break it, challenge it, and you have to keep it up there, flying around for all to see and enjoy.
Yeah.
How difficult a job is it?
It can be difficult at times. I mean, the main problems we have is finding spares at short notice.
But of course you can't just go and draw a new part off the shelf as you would have done during the 40s. Do you have to manufacture a lot of parts?
We do have to manufacture a lot of parts now. But as long as we've got the original drawing and original material specs, we can have anything made.
How long have you been working on Lancasters for?
I've actually done 11 years in total.
Wow.
I have been back working on tornadoes and typhoons in between, but I managed to come back. I definitely prefer working on the Lancaster and the aircraft that we've got here. It's engineering, it is grassroots. It's what I joined up to do, and if you work on a typhoon, computers tend to tell you what's wrong with it, and you're just changing boxes a lot of the time. Whereas here, we get the drawings out and we get things made.
So having spent months stripping it all down and putting it back together again, do you get to have a ride? Does he take you for a spin?
It does give us a spin. We do get to fly in the Lancaster, which is a massive privilege being on the flight.
Brilliant. That's a perk worth having, isn't it? Gary, thank you very much indeed. We'll leave you to your very technical drawings and we'll continue our tour, shall we, Roger?
Thank you.
Come and have a look up the front. Well, Jules, welcome to my world. This is where I get the best view of things.
This is your office. This is amazing.
This is my office, yes.
It looks, needless to say, incredibly complicated up here, Roger. Is it a delicate aircraft to fly? Because pilots did say they loved it.
It's not a delicate aircraft to fly. You do have to manhandle her around the skies. But because you do actively fly her around the skies, that's part of the appeal, that's part of the love for flying her.
Well, Roger, it's been an absolute treat to take such a close look at this aircraft, and it's perfectly clear that both in the air and on the ground, she is in very, very good hands. Thank you very much. In 1941, just as the first Lancasters were being tested by Avro, an inquiry was commissioned into the accuracy of bomber command. What it revealed was that on a routine mission such as those carried out by aircraft from RAF Coningsby, only 1 in 5 aircraft were capable of dropping their bombs within 5 miles of the target. It wasn't proving to be the strategically decisive weapon that Churchill had envisaged. In February 1942, the man charged with turning Bomber Command into an effective task force was Sir Arthur Harris. He envisaged massive raids using an organised approach to direct the bombers over their targets. On the night of the 30th of May 1942, 1,047 bombers headed towards the German city of Cologne. The results were devastating. Only 3% of the bombers that took part were lost, and a large percentage of targets were destroyed. Harris was able to demonstrate how effectively a large bomber force could inflict crucial damage. 2 more subsequent operations to Essen and Bremen became known as the 1,000 Bomber Raids. As a result, Bomber Command received increased resources, allowing them to play a crucial role in the final Allied victory. The most famous squadron to fly from Coningsby was 617, otherwise known as the Dam Busters. Later on in the war, they moved to Woodall Spa, and this, the Petwood House Hotel, became their officers' mess. They were an elite bunch, specifically formed to deliver the brainchild of pioneering aviation engineer Barnes Wallace.
Rob! Hello mate, nice to see you.
Hi Jules.
Look at this place, it's stuffed to the rafters with 617 memorabilia.
Well, welcome to the spiritual home of 617 Squadron.
Now the walls are plastered in images of the squadron and its exploits, and of course their heroes as well. And over there, Barnes Wallace. And in a way we can't talk about 617 without starting with Wallace, because without him it wouldn't have existed.
Certainly, because the squadron was formed specifically for one operation initially, and that was to deliver his bouncing bomb.
He was a remarkable engineer. I noticed on the way in you've got some drawings of the bomb. Can we take a closer look and try and understand how it worked and what he was trying to do?
Well, he was a remarkable engineer. I mean, he'd started off life just before the First World War. Having been a marine engineer, he switched to designing airships.
What encouraged him to start thinking about munitions?
Well, the thing was that he wanted to find a way of making a contribution to the war, and he thought, well, how best can an engineer bring the war to a rapid end? Now, before the war, the Air Ministry and the RAF had been looking at various targets, and amongst the targets, they'd looked at sources of power, but all the sources of power, be it coal mines or dams and that, simply too massive to be damaged by bombs of that period, which were relatively small and relatively ineffective. But Wallace latched onto this, and he thought, well, let's take a target like a dam. How can we actually knock a dam down? And his first idea was to create a very large bomb, a bomb of 10 tons, but then experimentation showed that even a large bomb dropped relatively close to the dam still wouldn't do it. And after that, they then found that a much smaller charge, but it placed directly in contact with the dam wall, would actually do the job. So you didn't need a big bomb, you just needed a small bomb, and you needed to get it in contact with the dam wall, and that was the problem.
And that was the challenge, to get the bomb into such a specific position that it could do its work against the dam.
Absolutely, and that's how he devised the bouncing bomb.
It is the most unconventional looking bomb in many respects. How difficult a job was it for Wallace to sell this to the Air Ministry?
Well, you imagine, bearing in mind that the dam raid hasn't happened and all this isn't history yet, and someone comes along to you and says, I've got this idea for a 4.5 ton bomb and I can make it bounce across the surface of a reservoir and hit a target. I mean, you're going to think that just another one of those crackpot schemes, isn't it?
The idea behind the bouncing bomb, known as upkeep, was to deliver a charge to the base of a German dam where it would cause the most damage. In theory, if dropped at a certain speed, angle and point on the lake, upkeep would bounce along the water, hop over the torpedo nets, hit the dam, sink straight down to the optimal depth for destruction and detonate. Well, this all looks a little bit Heath Robinson, Rob.
Well, I mean, it is in many respects, but this is exactly how Wallace started out testing his theory which developed into the bouncing bomb.
So we've got a tin bath full of water, a string suspended between two canes and a table at the far end. What was the idea?
Well, really, in order to develop his idea, first thing Wallace needed to do, apart from to establish whether or not you could actually bounce something off water, but he needed to establish the law of ricochet and prove that it could be done consistently. So what you've got to do is you've got to imagine that here is a catapult.
So I'm the catapult.
He took his missile, for which he used one of his daughter's marbles,
right,
and placed it in the catapult, fired it at a low angle, the intention being to ricochet it off the surface of the water over this string to land on the table.
And he's looking to find a formula that's going to predict that consistently.
Exactly. What he's trying to do is to have an experiment he can replicate in order to calculate basically the law of ricochet. And for that, he simply needs a number of inputs, which is the force or the speed of the marble being projected, the height at which it bounces, which he can determine by the string, and then the distance that the bounce has taken. So from those, he can actually calculate the curve of trajectory. And by doing that and varying the inputs, he can come up with the mathematical formula he's looking for.
It is remarkable, though, when you think about it, from such humble beginnings, this very simple experiment is transformed in the mind of this incredibly talented and dedicated engineer into what becomes arguably the most audacious air raid of the war.
Really, the crunch comes on the eve of the operation, when the squadron are being told for the first time what they're going to do, and Wallace stands in front of them and explains the weapon. I'm sure there must have been some element going through his mind of thinking, I hope my calculations are correct.
But they were going out to conduct the ultimate experiment, I suppose, in the mind of the scientist.
Yes, I mean, you could put it that way, and it was an experiment over which he had no control.
But the raid was on.
The raid was on.
On the night of the 16th of May 1943, 19 Lancasters left for Germany. 617 Squadron were entrusted with the task of crippling 3 key German dams, the Möhne, the Eder and the Sorpe. The attack was called Operation Chastise and utilised the ingenious bouncing bomb designed by Wallace.
The 5 crews, of which we were one, were briefed for the Sorpe. And of course, the Sorpe had to be different. It didn't have any towers, so there's no sighting to go to it. It was so placed in the hills that a head-on attack was very difficult, in fact almost impossible. The first thing we noticed was that on the hill down which we were supposed to make the attack, there was a church spire halfway down. So Joe said, right, I'm using that as a marker, and he used that to line up the aircraft as best he could onto the target. If I wasn't satisfied, I called dummy run. If Joe wasn't satisfied, he just pulled away and left me to call dummy run. And it was that stage, after about the 6th or 7th of these, that Dave Roger came up with, won't somebody get that bum out of here? I had to realise how to become the most unpopular member of crew in double quick time. But there we were. So on the 10th run, we were down to 30 feet. And when I said, bomb gone, thank Christ came from the rear turret. But then, being so low, it was nose up straight away, so I didn't see the explosion. But Dave did, and he estimated that the water went up to about 1,000 feet. We looked around, and we had crumbled the top of the dam, a distance of about 10 yards. Barnes Wallace had told us that because of the structure of the Sorpe, it would take at least 6 bombs to crack it. Yet if you can crack it, the water pressure will do the rest. And judging from the amount of water in that dam, yes, I'm sure he was right.
Operation Chastise breached the Möhne and the Eder dams and damaged the Sorpe, but the losses were high. Out of the 19 Lancasters that took part, 3 had to turn back, leaving just 16 to complete the mission. Of those, 8 were lost, along with 56 aircrew.
As far as the raid itself was concerned, yes, it was a success. It proved to Hitler and the German hierarchy that what they thought was impregnable, the Royal Air Force could get through and destroy. And it meant that the skilled workmen that were working on a anti-invasion wall along the coast had to be withdrawn to work on the repair of the dams. But I think the greatest advantage was the morale effect it had on the people of this country. I was one of the lucky ones, in the right crew, in the right time, in the right place, and equally lucky to get back.
The military effectiveness of Operation Chastise has long been debated, but its value as a propaganda tool and as a morale booster cannot be denied. And perhaps most importantly of all, it gave the British public hope that after nearly 4 years of fighting, at last the tide of the war could be turning in their favour.
Rob, after the success of the Dams raid and the bouncing bomb, Wallace is very moved by the loss of life amongst the air crews that took part, isn't he?
Very much so. He'd stood in front of the crews that were going off to do the operation. He'd spoken to them, he'd seen them in front of him. And then, of course, the following morning, he saw, in effect, the empty tables and realised the human cost of the development and his weapon in terms of aircrew lives. And he was extremely moved by this.
But it doesn't put him off, and he goes on to develop bigger and better munitions, now ably supported by the head of Bomber Command, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, who, let's face it, was pretty sceptical about the bouncing bomb.
Harris has allegedly turned to him after the operation and said, well, Wallace, I didn't believe a word that you told me, but now you could sell me a pink elephant. And in fact, here we actually have, I suppose, what you might call the pink elephant.
This is it. Is this the famous tall boy?
That's right. Wallace reverted back to his original concept of a large bomb that would penetrate deep into the ground, causing an earthquake effect. And Harris had, in fact, given him the green light to go ahead and develop this. So here we have it. This is Tall Boy. It's a 12,000-pound deep penetration bomb. The concept being that dropped from high altitude, it's a very heavy bomb. It will hit the ground and penetrate deeply underground before exploding. And then when it detonates, the shockwave will travel through the earth and shake any structure in the vicinity.
But Rob, I suppose in many ways, the development of this particular bomb once again continues this now established relationship between 617 Squadron and the mind of Wallace. The two things are absolutely interdependent upon each other.
Very much so, yes. And of course, it was from here at Woodhall Spa that the squadron carried out its operations using Wallace's bombs of Tall Boy and Grand Slam. Initially, the first attack was made against a railway tunnel, which proved the earth-moving qualities of the weapon. It then went on to be used against U-boat pens, V-weapon sites, and of course Germany's most fearsome battleship, Tirpitz.
Rob, how would you assess the legacy of Wallace's contribution to the war effort?
Well, it was certainly significant in that Wallace provided Bomber Command with the weapons to destroy major targets which they would otherwise have been unable to destroy, and at the same time Bomber Command provided Wallace with a way of delivering those weapons with precision in the form of 617 Squadron.
Second only to the attrition suffered by U-boat crews, serving in Bomber Command was arguably the most dangerous profession of the war. Of 125,000 aircrew who served, some 55,000 lost their lives. It's an enormous figure, equal to the population of a small town. Here at Coningsby Cemetery, in amongst the Commonwealth war graves, is one that is dedicated to an unknown airman. And it serves as a poignant reminder to all of those who lost their lives throughout 6 years of the aerial campaign. Following the success of the bouncing bomb, Barnes Wallace returned to developing even larger weapons. These would allow bombers from RAF Coningsby and other air bases to target reinforced structures like U-boat pens and secret rocket sites. Wallace produced deep penetration earthquake bombs. First the Tall Boy at 6 tons and then the Grand Slam at 10. Now, to really understand the physics and the mechanics behind the earthquake or the Tall Boy bomb, you really need to somehow see it in action. Now, of course, we don't have a real one that we can just let off, but we can get close to it. So I have enlisted the help of my old mate, Tony Lewis, a man whose passion for military history is equalled only by his passion for pyrotechnics. If anyone can help us make a bag, it's him.
Nice and square.
Tony! Hello, mate.
Jules, how you doing?
I'm very well, mate. How are
Excellent.
you?
Not bad, a little bit mutton Jeff these days.
A little bit deaf?
Aye.
How are your fingers?
All there.
Something's going well. Now tell me, what is going on here?
What we're doing is we're building a structure to help to show the effects of the blast and overpressure from, in this case, a 500-pound general purpose bomb that would have been used in carpet bombing. And what we're going to show is that a surface blast wouldn't knock down a structure of this type.
But an earthquake bomb would.
It certainly would.
So this is a typical structure you might find supporting a bridge, a railway, that sort of thing. So why wouldn't a conventional bomb shatter this in a way that an earthquake bomb might have done?
Well, I could show you that. I've got a small version here.
What's this from?
This is actually a Stuka fragmentation bomb. The thing with this type of bomb is when it hits the ground, it explodes. And so all the explosive energy is dissipated into the atmosphere. We'll get a small crater, okay, a reasonable crater, but most of the energy's gone into the atmosphere.
Brilliant. Well, we better finish building this then.
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind grabbing some blocks and we'll complete it.
It's like a sort of giant Jenga, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, there's some weight to this. I mean, it's not going to blow over in the wind, is it?
No.
Last one, Tony. You get the privilege of that. Okay. There we go. So how big a charge are you going to put next to this to simulate our 500-pound bomb?
Okay, obviously this is a model of a structure, so we're going to do a scaled down version. We're going to use 1/2 kilo of TNT, and that will simulate the effect of a general purpose bomb. Okay, exploding above surface, you'll see the shockwave propagate out, and you'll see that the tower will still be there.
You are so confident. I love it, Tony. I love your confidence. You haven't let me down in the past, mate.
No, I won't let you down this time, neither.
Right then, let's get on with stage 1 and detonate our 500-pounder.
Let's do it. Okay, Jules, there we go. This is the firing point.
Ah, this is what I'm after.
Okay, get your defenders on.
Let's have a concrete wall between us and that.
Yes, definitely.
Right, mate. I like this, Tony. This is very old school.
Yes, it's German Second World War.
You're joking?
It's just ideal for the job. It was designed for bridge demolition, etc.
Only you would have one of those.
Oh, she's my little baby. Okay, we'll wind her up.
Yep. Okay.
You good?
Good.
Okay, stand by. 3, 2, 1.
I didn't see any bits.
No. I think she'll still be standing.
Pint says it's still standing.
On that.
Wow,
She's still there, Jules.
I owe you a pint.
And as you could see, very much like a general purpose bomb would do, it's dug a crater. A certain amount has hit the tower. You've got a certain amount of debris.
Yeah, there's a bit of grass up there, look.
Yeah.
And it all smells a bit of explosive, actually, and
Yes, yeah.
fuel. And you can see where it sort of charred it somewhat, and the grass around about. But you can see what a challenge Bomber Command faced when trying to take out targets like this, even with hundreds, thousands of conventional bombs. You could get close to it, but actually not really scratch it.
And even if you did hit it, you know, it didn't tend to blow the structure to pieces. It would blow a piece off it.
Well, I can't wait to see what your tall boy will do to this concrete tower, Tony.
I think you'll find it's not standing.
Well, listen, I've already lost a pint so far. I'm not going to bet again.
Well, I'll settle on a nice steak and kidney pie for this one.
All right, you're on.
Okay.
Go on then.
The effect of a 500-pound general-purpose bomb used in carpet bombing would only create a surface blast. What Wallace did was to take it a step further, producing bombs that would go deeper into the earth before exploding, creating an earthquake effect underneath the structure. So let's see how well our tower fares with this explosion.
So what I want you to do first is we need to prime up the exploder. So if you can wind that up until it comes to a stop. It's quite a strong spring.
Here we go. Our tall boy underneath our pile of concrete blocks. Stand by! 3, 2, 1.
Excellent.
There is almost certainly no chance that that is still there. Oh my goodness me, look at that. That's astonishing. Not only is the tower not standing, but look at the
debris, all being lifted out of the ground. Okay, and did you feel the shock wave coming through the ground towards us?
Oh yeah. And this is a tiny handful of TNT, not 22,000 pounds worth of it.
So you can imagine, in scale, a very similar effect to what the tall boy would give.
I didn't expect a hole this big.
Yes, we've got some filling in to do.
But how did the bomb itself not explode on impact? How did it get so deep underground before going off?
Barnes Wallace, very clever man. He used Torpex, which is a very powerful explosive, but also a stable explosive, so it could withstand the impact of hitting the ground and not going off through the shock. He also used a hardened bomb casing, okay, that would withstand hitting the ground and penetrating it without shattering the casings. And he also used the height and the aerodynamics of the bomb, which would travel at over 700 miles an hour, so it's breaking the sound barrier.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and as you can see from this, it's not a case of hitting the structure.
No.
It's better just to miss, okay, and then rely on the shock wave travelling through the ground to bring the structure down. And you can really see that.
A finer demonstration, Tony, I could not have hoped for.
I'm proud of myself.
Come on then. I'll sort you out with that pint of pint now.
Aye. Maybe some chips and peas?
Wish you luck now, look.
The years following the Second World War saw political and military tension between the East and West grow, resulting in the Cold War. It was also a time of rapid development in technology, with the advancement of the jet engine and nuclear weapons. It was a combination of these that culminated in Britain's V bombers, the Valiant, the Vulcan and the Victor, 3 jet-powered monsters designed to carry Britain's nuclear weapons.
In 1962, with the Cold War reaching its climax, Coningsby welcomed its first squadron of Vulcans, and they were housed in these very distinctive Gaydon hangars, notable because of those huge double doors to accommodate the Vulcan's enormous tail fin. And the hangar itself is a great demonstration of the difference in scale between the Vulcan and one of the RAF's modern multi-role aircraft. Now, there is today only one V bomber, as they were known, left flying, the XH-558.
The Vulcan is quite a different aircraft to a lot of aircraft. It's a big aeroplane, but it has very, very powerful controls. So even though the aircraft is about the size of an Airbus airliner, it flies and feels more like a fighter. So we've got very powerful flight controls, and we have a control stick rather than a control column, which you might expect in a big aeroplane.
The Vulcan was first manufactured in 1952 and was the backbone of the UK's airborne nuclear deterrent. From 1957 to 1969, it stood by for 24 hours a day, armed with nuclear weapons, ready to take off within 2 minutes of a Soviet attack. Luckily, it was never called into action.
The Vulcan actually is going to eventually stop flying, unlike a sort of a vintage car where you can keep driving the car over and over providing you pass the MOT. Aeroplanes have a finite life. I feel very privileged to fly the Vulcan. There's only one Vulcan flying in the world, and there's only a handful of us that actually fly the aircraft, so I'm very lucky to that end. I will be very sad when we stop flying her.
RAF Coningsby was the base for 3 operational squadrons of Vulcans during the 1960s, but more technological advances meant they were replaced. The last airworthy Vulcan is maintained and flown by members of the Vulcan to the Sky Trust in Doncaster.
Wow, look at that. You know, each year that passes could be the last that this incredible Vulcan is kept in the air, but to look after it and maintain it to such a high standard is, as you can appreciate, an ongoing struggle, which is why I've come to meet the engineers who make it all possible. And as you can see, to offer them my humble services. It's also a brilliant excuse to get my hands dirty. Wow, Taff. Hello, mate, how are you? Good to see you.
Judge. Nice, eh?
Wow, you can smell the fuel.
Yes.
What are you doing?
During the winter, what we're doing is replacing a couple of the fuel drain traps. We need to test the fuel every so often for any water and reseating them now and again.
You've been working on these aircraft for how long?
On and off over 30 years now. Done 26 years in the RAF, joined up as a young lad and come out to training straight onto the Vulcans.
So you remember what it was like, what the atmosphere was like for the ground crews and the air crews when these were a nuclear deterrent?
Yes, I was still working on the aircraft. In fact, one of the jobs as an electrician was actually test out the nuclear systems.
What I find astonishing is the relatively short period of time between the Lancaster, say, and this.
It was completely new, straight at the back end of the Second World War. It was designed by the same people who done the Lancaster, and there's only 11 years difference between the flight test of the Lancaster and the flight test of a Vulcan.
Now, look, I'm kitted up, I'm ready to go. I'm happy to get as mucky as you like. What are you up to here again?
We're just replacing one of the fuel drain valves, and what you can do, if you like, you can fit the new one.
Is this it?
Bit. Yep, that's the new one there.
Is that something that's brand new? Do you have to make that?
No, we've actually got this from one of the manufacturers, and in fact there's a label in here, look, come from overhauled back in 1989 when they bought the aeroplane off as scrap value when it was sold off in 93. They bought, say, over 600 tons of spares, so luckily we do have a spare one of these.
So what's the trick then, Taff?
Well, the trick is we'll take the cap off, put the new washer on for you, and if you'd like to get yourself some gloves and glasses, you can fit it, if you think you're clever enough.
Well, you know, I'm a shocker for over-tightening things. We don't want to get it cross-threaded, do we? Because otherwise we'll have to...
That's the last thing we need to do.
Retap
Otherwise you'll just ground a £10 million aeroplane, and it'll be around about 200,000 people who won't see it next year.
Yeah, there's no pressure then.
No pressure at all. Yep, we've just come up this ladder here. I think it'll be the easiest one for you to go up.
Gosh, look at all... I mean, all of these avionics, all of these pipes and anodised parts. I mean, it is incredible the amount of equipment and paraphernalia that goes into keeping even what appear to be the simplest systems running.
It is, yeah. It's all the various fuel supply pipes into and out of the fuel tanks, and that's what supplies the engines.
So I'm just putting that straight into that?
Yeah, into that hole.
Now, I don't want fuel running down my wrist if I can help it. There we go. Oh, there we go. Right. There's the fuel. She's in.
She's in.
How about
Hurrah!
that? Hey!
I'll make an engineer out of you yet.
There we are. Brilliant.
There you are. You have helped service the last flying Vulcan in the world.
Well, I just am astounded that this aircraft is still flying. And when you look at the minutiae of what has to happen to keep it in the air, I think it's not just a credit to you, but also a credit to its design.
Well, it is iconic. It's the unique shape of it, and it's the size, the power, and as I say, once seen, heard and felt, when you get at maximum power, it's never forgot.
If this wasn't available to play with, what would you do with yourself?
Probably have to find a proper job.
Well, you did a great job with this one, mate. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thankfully, the V bombers were never used for their intended purpose, but in many ways you could argue that they fulfilled their brief. They helped prevent the outbreak of a nuclear war by acting as a very potent nuclear deterrent.
The only time the Vulcan would ever fly in anger was during the Falklands War in 1982, when the Vulcan was tasked with a conventional bombing mission to take out runways and radar stations. It would be the last mission flown by this iconic aircraft.
There are no longer any heavy bombers based at Coningsby or indeed the rest of the UK. But fear not, these bomb-proof Cold War hangars are now home to something else, something far more potent. The Eurofighter Typhoon. This is it, arguably the most capable aircraft the RAF has ever possessed, and it just goes to show what can happen if you lock aero engineers from Germany, Italy, Spain and Britain in a room and leave them there for long enough. That's exactly what they did back in 1988, and this is what they came up with 15 years later. Much of its design is still top secret. That red bag on the front there, that's covering up the air intake. I'm not allowed to show it to you. It's that sensitive. It can carry a suite of weapons, you name it. It can do it, air to air, air to surface. And here, this is the business end. 2 EJ200 engines, each one developing some 20,000 pounds of thrust. That means the Eurofighter can travel at 1.8 Mach. That's nearly twice the speed of sound. It really is a phenomenal piece of engineering. And when you consider, what, 100 years ago, we were just about getting into the air, look where we've come. This is the future. This is the 21st century fighter in all its glory.
There are between 40 and 50 Typhoons at Coningsby at any one time, belonging to 4 RAF squadrons.
Well, Justin, that's the future, isn't it? The Typhoon.
Yeah.
We no longer talk about heavy bombers in terms of the RAF's infantry. What brought about their decline?
We've gone away from heavy bombers as such and into a more multi-role fighter aircraft. But the effect is the same. We can still deliver bombs on target with a multi-role aircraft like Typhoon. And the difference is we don't need to carry as many because we can precisely put those bombs where we'd like to.
And in terms of that capability, how flexible is it? Because in the old days we'd have bomber pilots and we'd have fighter pilots. Now, as a Typhoon pilot, you have to do both.
We have to do all roles, yeah. So our 2 squadrons, our 2 frontline squadrons here at Coningsby, the pilots are trained in all roles. And we can swing from one to the other almost on a daily basis.
Now, going back, say, 70 years to those heady days during the war when Bomber Command possessed thousands of aircraft, is it possible to equate a squadron of Typhoons, say, to a number of squadrons in terms of the punch that they can pack?
You could always go back to what the effect is you want. So if you want to take down, let's say, World War II, a number of factories, you would calculate how many bombs you would need to do that and get actually on target. Then you'd work back and say, well, this would take 20 Lancasters. And with the accuracy of those weapon aiming systems and the bomb itself, that's probably how much you'd need. With Typhoon, we can say that bomb will go in that particular place. We don't need as many aircraft to do the same mission because the technology allows us to be more precise in what we're delivering.
Now, we do live in very different times. The threats that are posed towards the United Kingdom now come in varying forms.
Yes.
How quickly can your boys get airborne?
How long's this piece of string? And we like to keep people guessing with that particular question.
Yeah.
I mean, every minute of every day we're ready to tackle whatever threat is put the UK's way, and we're here to defend our skies.
Justin, you've had the chance to fly some of the most iconic aircraft that the RAF have possessed over the last 75 years, starting with the Spitfire and now currently on the Typhoon. What's your favourite?
It's a difficult question. As you say, I've flown some pretty serious hardware. Typhoon is the most awesome fighter jet that I've flown. The power it has is truly remarkable. However, the Spitfire just has that X factor. It's iconic. It carries with it a lot of history, a lot of memories, and it is a true fighter pilot's aircraft. So the Spitfire has it.
When you fly a Spitfire, your mind must cast itself back to the days when that was developed and to those men who flew it.
I had one particular moment flying a Spitfire over Kent where I realised I was flying through the same airspace that the Battle of Britain happened 75 years ago. And that was quite an emotional moment when I sat in a Spitfire in that bit of airspace. So we're very proud of our history, and that ethos carries on today with the fighter pilots across the runway here on the front lines.
Coningsby is a survivor. It was christened in the 1940s. It evolved through the Second World War, the Cold War, and today remains very much at the front line of Britain's air defences here in the 21st century. Its aircraft, from the Battle of Britain Memorial flight with its Hurricanes, Spitfires, and of course its Lancaster, through to its modern squadrons of sophisticated Typhoons, in many respects encapsulate the story of the RAF. But also, there's something else. Not only does it capture its spirit, it also points the way to its future. For over a century, the legendary tales that have surrounded our great British airfields have inspired generations of people, including me, which is why I am on a personal mission to cross the UK to visit some of our most important airfields, to understand not just about their contribution to our past, but importantly, how many of them have helped define our future. From the UK's first flight, through to groundbreaking innovations such as carbon fibre and the jet engine, and the extraordinary effort spent on preserving our aviation heritage. Join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have helped shape Britain and the world. Today we are at Bournemouth Airport. It's a small regional airport on England's south coast, and today it caters for about 1 million passengers a year, most of them heading out on holiday. But 70 years ago, life here was very different, because back then, during the Second World War, this was otherwise known as RAF Herne. And in those days, the skies above me would have echoed to the roar of hundreds of Allied aircraft. During World War II, RAF Herne was only operational for 3 years, but its time as a transporter and fighter airfield was put to good use. It was home to a range of aircraft, including gliders, Mosquitoes, Wellingtons and Typhoons.
RAF Herne was built because, following the invasion threat of the summer of 1940, the Air Ministry thought it could occur the following year, and a large number of defensive airfields were built along the south coast. Herne was one of them. It was constructed during 1940-41 and it was opened on the 1st of August 1941. But by that time, the threat of a second invasion had passed, and so it was not needed for its initial purpose. Herne was used for training by airborne forces. They were dropping paratroopers and also training in towing gliders, which were going to be used for D-Day.
Gliders were first used in combat by the Germans. These engineless aircraft allowed them to glide silently to their targets unnoticed, dropping troops in precise areas and in concentrated groups. It wasn't long before the UK and her allies developed their own force.
The glider pilot regiment was deemed necessary following the German attack on the Belgian fortress of Eben-Emael in 1940. Following the success of that German offensive, Winston Churchill decided that the ability to move men and material ahead of the front line was something that we should investigate and build on.
In February 1942, the Glider Pilot Regiment was ready for battle. It was a cooperation between two forces. The pilots would be recruited from the British Army, but they would be trained by the RAF.
The first major glider operation of the Second World War was the assault on Sicily in 1943. The operations were a success. All targets were achieved, but there were heavy losses. About 50% of the gliders used landed in the sea, and a lot were hit by anti-aircraft fire on the way in.
During World War II, there were 3 main Allied gliders. The Hadrian, made by the Americans, could take 13 men and their equipment. But it was soon superseded by the British Horsa, which was larger and heavier. The biggest glider was the Hamilcar, which took heavy loads, including light tanks.
One of the problems during the Sicily landings when they were using the Hadrian gliders is that if they wanted to deliver anti-tank artillery, the anti-tank gun and the jeep required to pull it would be carried in 2 separate gliders. If one of them didn't make the landing zone or was lost, then obviously that meant the load was unusable. Therefore, in following operations, they tried to ensure that those loads were taken in a Horsa glider where the jeep and the anti-tank gun could be carried together. Thus, you'd have a fully working load as soon as the glider touched down.
The Horsa was used by the Glider Regiment in all its major operations. The prototype first flew on the 12th of September 1941, and it was operational until 1945. It was manoeuvrable in flight and could carry up to 25 troops. Built mainly of plywood, it was 67 feet long with a wingspan of 88 feet, and it could glide at a speed of 100 miles an hour.
During the Second World War, the Glider Pilot Regiment took part in 14 operations. These varied in size, the smallest involving 2 gliders, the largest nearly 700. Over the course of the war, they lost nearly 600 men killed in action, as well as many more wounded and taken prisoner of war.
World War II gliders were often referred to wryly by their crews as flying coffins, but to get a real idea of the challenges their pilots faced, I've come here to join the gang at the Buckminster Gliding Club. They're based here at the former RAF Saltby. From this runway, aircraft and gliders ferried lead elements of the US 82nd Airborne Division over to Normandy on the eve of D-Day. This is a place steeped in history, and with any luck, if the weather clears up, I might see it from the air.
Wartime gliders were towed most of the way to their target by military transport aircraft. The one-way nature of the missions meant they were viewed as disposable, which meant they were made from common and inexpensive materials such as wood. Thankfully today, well, they're all made from carbon fibre and built to last.
Well, that all seems to fit nicely. Hello, Pete.
Hi, Jules. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, mate.
Yeah.
Thank you for this.
You all right, are you?
Hope I won't need it.
Suits you, sir.
Now, I've never flown in a glider before. What's it going to be like? Is it going to be really quiet? Is it going to be noisy, bumpy?
I think today will be fairly benign and upstairs. There'll be very little turbulence, I would think. I can show you some turbulence when we go through the wake of the prop wash of the tug, just to replicate what would be happening in wartime conditions flying over the channel. So we can sort something out for you. We'll get you sorted.
Good. Well, I'm raring to go. Come on. There we go. Oh, quite bumpy.
So we're off the ground now, so we'll follow behind him, waiting for him to lift off.
Gosh, so we're in the air, there he goes. Wow. There we go, tug's airborne, we're airborne. Wow, that rush of air. You can certainly hear it and feel it. It's amazing. Tug's just banking away now to the right gently. Our tail line is nice and tight, and there we go, look, there's Lincolnshire and Leicestershire in the gloom.
Yeah, we've just gone in the low tow position. It's trying to replicate what they actually did during the Second World War. So that would be the position that they actually fly in. It's easier to control the glider.
Is it?
And of course you've got the aircraft in full view.
It's a relatively small aircraft, of course, that's towing us. I imagine, Pete, that the prop wash from a twin-engine Dakota onto a Horsa must have been quite destabilising in some ways.
Well, yeah, I'll give you a little taste of that. I'll just pull up into the prop wash of the aircraft. There you are, you can feel the prop wash.
Oh, it was starting to vibrate now.
Yeah, that's the vibration.
Yeah.
You can imagine, as you said, twin engines.
Yeah.
4 engines on Halifaxes and Stirlings.
Yes.
The air full of these, hundreds of aircraft, all in close proximity as well.
Even though I've only been in the air for a few minutes, getting a sense of what these glider pilots had to do and the conditions they operated in, I think they have piqued my admiration, actually. They were often flying at night, they had no power, there was no second chance once the tow was cast off.
Being a glider pilot was one of the most dangerous jobs in the military. During World War II, they suffered 50% casualties and won over 170 awards for valour. During D-Day alone, 867 RAF and United States Air Force gliders flew to France, with 100 pilots becoming casualties.
And we should spare a thought, of course, for the troops that the glider pilots were ferrying. They didn't have the view I have, of course, today. They were sat in the back, facing each other. It was dark, they couldn't see where they were going. They had to trust implicitly the pilots that were taking them into action. We're only up here for, relatively speaking, a few minutes. I wouldn't want to have to spend hours contemplating the future, flying all the way over to occupied Europe, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, flying nowadays to us is second nature. But some of these 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds, it was the first time they'd had in an aircraft. And no doubt they suffered from real bouts of air sickness.
Yeah.
You know, read stories of them using the helmets as, you know, to hold the vomit. So the whole inside of the glider would be a smelly place to be, I would think.
I should think a large number of them were terrified before they'd even got out and met the enemy. Now, Pete, you're going to demonstrate for me quite a steep descent to replicate the descent that the Horsas would have taken during the war to get themselves out of the danger zone as quickly as possible and down on the ground.
The glider itself wanted to be as little time in the air as possible when it came off tow.
because that's when it was really vulnerable to small arms fire. So what we'd have to do then is to get down on the ground as quickly as possible.
Okay, well, I guess we should release our tow.
Jules camera, Jules glider, releasing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
I'm releasing the tow now.
Yep, go, that's it.
The tow is gone.
He's gone nice and steeply over.
Target's flown right away to our right there. He's clear. And now Pete is flying us independently.
We're flying at 70 knots, which is 10 knots under what the horse would actually fly at. We'll increase speed, we're coming up to increase the speed to 80 knots now,
okay,
which is more a replication of what the glider was doing during the Second World War.
So here's Saltby.
Here's the airfield, we're coming into it now.
Stretching out that main runway there that saw so much action during the war. So many men leaving here, heading over to Europe, many of whom, of course, sadly would never come back. But hopefully today Pete's going to bring me safely down to land. I suspect in a fairly dramatic fashion in a minute.
So we're going to get into an overshoot situation, and then I'll immediately dump the height.
Okay.
With the air brakes. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Going now, down.
Whoa! Oh, yeah, that's
air brakes
steep.
out. Control the descent, coming down.
Well, those brakes really are holding us in the air.
Yeah, they're holding it at 80 knots there.
We're coming in. And we're down. There we are. Well, that was fantastic, and thankfully I didn't need my parachute. And on arrival, no one's shooting at us.
The Second World War wasn't just about fighting on land, at sea and in the air. It was also about mental strategy, how to mislead the enemy and promote particular points of view, and what better way to do it than by spreading false information.
In January 1943, 296 Squadron flying out of Herne were tasked with a much more subversive kind of transport operation. Their mission was to drop leaflets. Now, on the face of it, that doesn't sound like a war-winning operation, but that's why I've come here to the lovely surroundings of Beaulieu Abbey in Hampshire to find out more.
Propaganda was spread through the occupied countries with the help of special operational executives known as SOEs. These were Churchill's secret army and conducted undercover operations including espionage, reconnaissance and sabotage.
Hello, Lee.
Hi, Jules. Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you too. Now, I do love a country house, particularly one with
So
a story attached to it. What's Bewley's tale?
Well, Beaulieu was SOE's finishing school. This is where SOE agents learnt their tradecraft.
Now, leafleting doesn't sound like a particularly aggressive form of warfare, so when did it start and what was the idea?
It wasn't particularly aggressive, but it was very much about breaking the morale of your enemy. It actually began on the very first night of the war.
Now, you've been studying the leaflet war, the propaganda war for many years, Lee. Presumably you've now seen everything that was ever printed.
Yeah, pretty much everything. And if you'd like to come this way, I'll show you a few more examples.
Airborne leaflets have been used for military propaganda purposes since the early 1900s. During World War II, the UK produced around 2,500 different versions, dropping a staggering 6 billion copies behind enemy lines.
Now, who decided what would go into these leaflets?
Well, the leaflets were prepared by another secret department called the Political Warfare Executive. This department was staffed with Foreign Office civil servants, journalists, graphic artists, émigrés who had escaped from occupied Europe. And they developed the leaflet themes, very much playing on any Allied success. Mm-hmm. The theme was constantly hammered home of the certainty of Allied victory, that we were going to definitely win the war eventually.
And what would trigger a leaflet drop? What would make them come up with something?
The pace of the war. So, for instance, after the victory at Al Alamein in North Africa, there was lots of leaflets and miniature pamphlets that dealt with the victory. The German defeat at Stalingrad was constantly hammered home, as well as the Allied bombing of Germany. When the 1,000 bomber raids took place in Cologne, that was constantly mentioned on leaflets.
So what are we starting with here then, Lee, for official use only?
Well, this is actually quite interesting. This is a piece of internal propaganda that PWE produced for RAF aircrew to actually encourage them to drop leaflets.
RAF against Goebbels?
Exactly.
Brilliant. And do you think this booklet did anything to persuade aircrews that what they were doing was worthwhile?
I think it did help. Certainly, aircrews did become interested in leaflet dropping.
Yeah.
In fact, most of the leaflets that survive are not the ones that were actually dropped, but the ones that were kept as souvenirs by aircrew.
And here we've got these two rather plaintive-looking Frenchwomen looking in through the window as Hitler, and I wonder if that's a kind of caricature of a very rotund Goering.
It could well be.
Making off with a bottle of wine and a plate full of food.
In 1941, Hitler announced a new European New Order, which would mean economic unity and racially pure Europe, and everyone was going to be prosperous under Nazi rule.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this took a more light-hearted view of what that actually meant for the people of France. The Germans are going to steal your dinner.
In studying the psychological and the propaganda war, you'll be well aware of white propaganda and black propaganda. For anybody not in the know, what was the difference, Lee?
Well, what we've just been looking at is white propaganda. This is official statements by the Allied government. So, you know, everyone knew who this propaganda was coming from. Black propaganda, on the other hand, pretends to be something it isn't. I have some examples here to show you.
Where did you manage to track these down?
Some of it comes from veteran aircrew. Some actually comes from former SOE agents and resistance fighters. And this little sticker was sent to the French resistance in container drops. And the sticker promises 6 weeks leave for the entire U-boat crew. And it follows sabotage advice on how a crewman could sabotage a U-boat. Sure.
That's incredible. Advice on how to sabotage a U-boat.
Yes. And the advice was very simple. It was just turn a few valves in the U-boat and it would explode the ballast tank.
That is absolutely fascinating. You know, I have read many accounts of U-boat crews towards the end of the war sabotaging their boats because the losses were so high. I wonder if these little stickers did have anything to do with it, if the two things join up.
It's quite possible. What would you say this is?
Incredible to think these are all original. That's fascinating. No idea. All I can recognise is August 1941. Looks pretty official. There's a stamp on it.
Well, you say it's an original. It's actually a fake, but a genuine fake.
A wartime
wartime fake of German ration coupons.
But how would faking a ration book win the war?
Every time these were dropped, it puts their system into chaos. They've got to reprint new rationing documents. People with existing rationing documents can't get their food or their clothes. It just puts the whole system into mayhem. And it was all about making life in Germany more difficult.
The months leading up to June 1944 saw the assembly and mobilisation of the largest invasion force in history. It was around Herne, here on the south coast of England, that hundreds of thousands of men, vehicles and all of their equipment were gathered and trained, all in preparation for Operation Overlord. Overlord was the code name given to the Allied invasion of France. It involved nearly 3 million Allied troops, 5,000 fighter aircraft and 6,000 ships. The day it was launched was known as D-Day.
Britain knew that to win the Second World War, eventually she would have to land on Western Europe and try and defeat the German army. Obviously, while Britain stood alone, this was a near impossible task, but once the Americans joined the war in December 1941 after Pearl Harbor, American reinforcements started to come into Britain and planning started to gather pace in 1942 and in 1943 in particular. And also immediately before D-Day, the RAF and the US Air Force bombers were strategically bombing large parts of northern France, in particular targeting transportation hubs such as the railway network to try and prevent the Germans from bringing reinforcements to the battle area quickly. So air bases like Herne started to gear up for D-Day several months before June 1944, ready for the final push before the operation was launched.
Troops were assembled in ports roughly opposite their target beaches in Normandy. The American troops stationed in Cornwall landed on Utah Beach, while the British troops who landed on Sword Beach were assembled in the Shoreham and Portsmouth areas.
The invasion fleets were given very clear lines to sail down across the Channel to France.
The Allies landed around 156,000 men in Normandy on D-Day alone. That's just in the first day, on 5 different beaches. They were providing very close support to the forces who were landing on D-Day, and later on during the Battle of Normandy, they were providing firepower to take on German units, and particularly vehicles and tanks, for example, that were immediately in front of them. And also, for example, the Mosquitoes were slightly heavier bombers than the Typhoons. They were more able to attack larger installations such as fortifications.
Without the glider pilot regiment and their targeted operations, the German counterattack could have been catastrophic during the D-Day landings.
About the 2nd of June, I think it was, we were briefed for the operation. Well, up to that point, we thought that we would be supplying the French resistance, who were much in the news at the time. But of course, in the event, when we were briefed, it was for the big show, D-Day. For us, the night before D-Day, and our job was to take over the stores, explosives, ammunition and so on. The operation initially should have started on the night of the 4th of June, and we should have landed in France on the 5th. But in the event, because of the inclement weather in the Channel, it was pushed forward 24 hours. Of course, when we were briefed, the German army was on the run, and there were just going to be a few people with pitchforks and so to greet us, but of course it didn't turn out that way. We were in very good heart, I would say. This was going to be a pushover.
The gliders had been tasked with a critical mission. Each glider carried troops and equipment to attack and destroy a series of strategically important bridges, preventing the German army gaining more ground.
I landed at the wrong place. I'm quite glad I did, really, because had I landed at the right place, there were a couple of Germans there who were taking prisoners and shooting them in the back of the head. From having landed in the wrong place, we made our way to the correct rendezvous, which was 8 miles inland. The equipment that I was delivering was an ambulance jeep, and the trailer was full of medical supplies with bottles of blood plasma and that sort of thing. When they got to the rendezvous at Toothville, a Royal Engineers officer commandeered the jeep, so they turfed all the medical stuff out, loaded the trailer up with explosive, and made their way down through a town called Troarn to blow this bridge. Of course, I would say this, but it was the principal bridge over there on the Dives River. It's the one through which the German armour would have come if they were going to mount any sort of operation from the east.
The mission was a success, and just 3 days after landing in Normandy, Weedon returned to the UK. Having successfully completed 10 vital operations throughout the war, the glider pilot regiment was eventually disbanded in 1957.
It was a very good unit to be in. That's how I think it should be remembered.
Now, once the Normandy beaches had been secured, transport ships off the coast started to unload thousands of men, vehicles, field guns, but also huge numbers of tanks. Now, perhaps the most famous is the American-built Sherman, which all the Allied armies used. But British armoured regiments had their own homegrown favourite, a real monster. And appropriately enough, they called it the Churchill.
Good morning.
How are you?
Very well.
This is just a joy to see. I've seen so many hulks of these beautiful machines on training ranges which have been used for target practice, full of holes, shadows of their former selves. But yours is in pristine condition. It's like it's just rolled off the Normandy beaches.
Well, it may well have rolled onto them, but it stayed in service, this tank, until at least the 60s. It was a bridge at the end, an arc, with a permanent bridge on top.
So the turret had been removed?
Turret had been removed, but we know from the records it was a Mark IV 6-pounder, so we've taken it back to what it would have been. And this is in fact one of the first tanks to leave the production line. So last out of service pretty much, first into service and the only one running in the world.
Now during D-Day, these came ashore in huge numbers. How effective were they in suppressing the enemy?
Well, they came ashore in a variety of guises, and one of the amazing things about the Churchill was that it became the backbone of what were called the funnies. So they weren't just gun tanks like this one, they were tanks that brought bridges ashore, that brought rolls of matting ashore that would go across shingle and up walls. There were tanks that had flamethrowers, and one of the adaptations of this tank, which really helped, fired a huge thing called a flying dustbin. It was a great big explosive charge, went about 80 yards and would knock out a pillbox, a house, a fortification. And between all of these specialised vehicles, they helped to get the British forces ashore and then off the beaches and fighting inland. Because, of course, what you don't want in a beach landing is to get stuck on the beach.
But going back to the Blitzkrieg of 1940, when German armour rolled itself across Europe, rolling up the Allied armies, one would say, right up to the coast at Dunkirk, those lessons of armour working with close air support were not lost on the Allies. And during D-Day, these tanks again came into their own in another kind of form, in another adaptation of their use, talking to the aircraft.
Yes, and the other thing to remember about the Churchill is it was an infantry tank, and it's not a tank designed really to take on enemy tanks. It was called an infantry tank, it went slowly, it went at the same speed as the infantry, taking out targets that they couldn't, and they in turn took out the guys with the anti-tank bazooka-like weapons that it couldn't deal with. And then above you had the Typhoons and the taxi rank of aircraft coming in to help. It was a fantastic combination of the different arms, all coordinated by radio, which at that stage was not in its infancy, but really it was coming into its own.
Now, my grandfather served on one of these, and I've never been in one. And it does look roomy enough for two.
I think you should come up. It's a must. You should drive it.
Now, that is an offer I'm not going to refuse. I guess the easiest way is probably up the front. Isn't it? Here we go. Wow. I mean, to say it's roomy in tank terms, it's all relative, isn't it? But there doesn't look like a huge amount of room in there. How many crewmen would be in the turret set?
Well, there are three. There are two guys on this side, commander and gunner,
Yeah.
and then on the other side, the person who loaded, and he had to operate the radio as well. 24 hours in this tank, nowhere to sleep, you had to stand up all the time. It's tough. These guys went through a lot.
Now, how many of these still run?
This is the only surviving running example of the Mark IV.
So the chance to get behind the wheel, as it were, today is
I
a
think
rare one.
you must do it.
Absolutely,
Come on, let's get in the driving compartment.
Which hatch is the driver's hatch?
It's on the right.
On
This
the right.
being a British tank, it's right-hand drive.
Of course it is. Yes, now one of the Americans didn't go for them in a major way. Just drop in.
Drop in, put your foot on the back of the driver's seat on that white metal strip.
Yep. And then just lower myself in.
Yeah.
Gosh, it is roomier in here than the Sherman. Much
Oh, yes.
roomier.
Yes.
Oh, there we are. It's fascinating, isn't it, looking around me. This isn't a place for the claustrophobic.
No.
But an amazing field of view there.
That hatch is then closed, and if you look to your right, there's one periscope.
This little tiny one here?
Yeah.
That is tiny.
And that's your view of the world. That's why you rely on the commander so much to tell you left, right. You can't see past the horns, the front of the tank.
And as you say, that reliance on one another, that unique bond amongst tank crews is still familiar in tank regiments today, isn't it?
It is, and I think the only other group who would have seen anything like it were the air crew, who in many cases supported the tanks, the bond between the people who totally rely on each other.
Well, I've seen a lot of aircraft cockpits. This, thankfully, does look a little bit simpler.
It is, and the pedals are exactly what you'd expect. On the left is the clutch.
Yep.
Middle is the brake.
Yep.
And the right-hand bar is the accelerator.
Okay. Gear stick here.
The gear stick is there and usefully numbered. And the important thing is the steering, and that's the two handles dropped down in front of you.
That's here?
Yes.
Yep.
The thing to remember with this tank, and many of the tanks from this era and beyond, is that they'll steer in neutral. So when the engine's running, don't move the steering handles unless you mean to, because the tank will slew.
So basically, if you take your hands off everything, it will just go forward in a straight line.
Indeed.
That's the theory.
It is.
Very
But first
good.
we have to start it.
So how do we fire it up, Nigel?
Little switch at the top of that panel.
This one here.
Turn it right.
Okay.
And then the big button in the middle of the instrument panel is the starter button.
Wow.
You could feel the whole tank moving.
What about the accelerator? Got to give it try a bit of gas?
Push the throttle gently, it's quite stiff.
Oh, there it is. That's quite a reassuring noise to go into battle with, isn't it?
Yes, unless you're trying to hear each other. Then ease the clutch up and steer once. Let it start rolling, then steer.
Okay. There we go, we're clanking to the right. Amazing. Gosh, imagine going to war in one of these. It really is like sitting in the heart of a dinosaur, this.
Yes.
There we are.
And neutral.
Neutral.
And turn the ignition off, I would suggest.
Wow. Wow. Nigel, thank you very much for that. Short but very sweet. And it's fascinating to think that while my grandfather was clattering across France, high above him, those typhoons from Herne were busy taking out the enemy. Amazing.
And so important. You imagine how comforting it must have been to know that you had air support, because the enemy that you were fighting you often couldn't see.
Yeah, yeah. And this wouldn't do it all. You certainly needed some help from above, probably in more ways than one.
Absolutely.
By the end of D-Day, the Allies had successfully landed on 5 key beaches along the Normandy coast, but that success had come at a high price, with some 10,000 casualties. And what's more, the really vital job of joining up those beachheads and securing key strategic towns in the area was still ahead of them. At the end of August 1944, Paris was finally liberated, effectively bringing to an end Operation Overlord. At the same time, huge numbers of Allied planes were being moved from Britain to France, and RAF Herne's use as a military airfield was coming to an end.
After the D-Day landings, the Typhoons had crossed the Channel and operated from Normandy. So at that time, there was no further military use for Herne. In August 1944, the Air Ministry decided that Herne would be used as a civilian airfield for BOAC. That was the national airline at the time, British Overseas Airways Corporation. Even though Herne was now a civilian airfield, there was nothing like an airport that we know of today. There was no need for the ordinary population even to think about flying at that time. The war was still looming over their head, and it was to be a long, long time before the British public were able to use airline services. The airport at Herne became very important because it was initially Britain's only international airport. Initial services from Herne served Iberia and North Africa, over to Cairo and out to the Middle East. Then there were plans to operate services to the Commonwealth again, and for this purposes it was arranged to fly the service with converted Lancaster bombers from Herne down to Sydney. Lancasters were converted because at that time there were no airliners available in Britain. The bombers were converted, the gun turrets were removed, the bomb bays were sealed up and seats were put inside. The flight to Sydney was advertised as taking 67 hours, which meant stopping 3 nights en route. The distance from Herne to Sydney was 13,400 miles, and the Lancastrians were able to cope with this.
RAF Herne had become Herne Airport, but due to its location over 100 miles from London, it wasn't a hit with the passengers. So when London Heathrow opened in 1946, the airlines moved their services to the new airport, leaving Herne with a different role.
The firm of Vickers Armstrong had a large factory at Weybridge, and they also had a large order book which they couldn't keep up with, so they were looking for a second production site. Herne was selected, and they took over the former BOAC hangars for production of varsity trainers and Viscount airliners. The Viscount went on to be a worldwide sales success, breaking into the magic North American market. Production continued until the final one was delivered at the beginning of 1964.
The Vickers factory would continue to produce successful airliners up until 1984. They even made parts for the legendary Concorde. But when production did end, well, the airport had to reinvent itself once again. Aircraft may no longer be built here at Bournemouth, but much of that earlier heritage does survive. Many of the hangars that now surround the airfield are full of companies providing parts, maintenance and essential services to the aircraft industry, like this one. Mike!
Jules! Pleased to meet you and welcome the Jets at Bournemouth.
Thank you very much indeed. This place is immaculate, isn't it?
It is. It's a corporate business aviation centre. We keep it clean because it produces that type of work.
And what have you got in here? That looks fascinating.
That's a Dornier 328 prop jet, originally built in Germany, but now they've stopped making them, but we have approval to service them, and this one is all the way up from Africa.
And what about this one, Mike?
This is a Hawker 800B, originally built in this country, probably about 25 to 30 years old.
I have been astonished, travelling around Britain's airfields, at how many private jets there are. I always assumed they were the preserve of the rich and wealthy, just a handful of them in Britain, but there are hundreds, if not thousands.
It may have started that way, but there is a misconception about it is the rich and wealthy, but it's not. It's now become a business tool, and people are beginning to realise that if you use them properly, they can be very good and cost effective for your business. And the UK probably has the second largest business aviation community in Europe.
Now, the boys look hard at work here, Mike. What are they actually doing to this aircraft today?
We are going to, because she's up for sale now and she's been on the ground for a while, we need to put her on sticks and exercise the undercarriage to make certain everything is working and to check all the associated warning systems with it in the flight deck. So if you'd like to join Bob up there, I'm sure he can find something for you to interest you.
I've never seen inside a private jet. It's always been a kind of secret world, but now's my chance.
Now's your chance, and please be my guest.
Hey, Bob.
Hi there, hi, Jules.
I'll get to you in a minute, mate. I'm going to have a quick look in here. Look at this. The world of the rich and famous. The private jet. Now, Mike was saying this aircraft is, what, 25 years old, so 1980s. It's certainly got that feel, very kind of Dallas with all this walnut and gold, but let's face it, it certainly beats flying economy, doesn't it? Right then, Bob. Hello, mate.
How you doing?
Look at this. Gosh, do you know what? I was expecting this to be very, very tiny, but it's about the same sort of size as a jumbo, isn't it?
It is. This aircraft, although it's a lot smaller, requires the same kind of navigation systems, electronic systems that the bigger jets have.
So what's Mike doing?
Mike is just going to turn the hydraulic rig on. That'll read 3,000 psi.
Oh, everything's just flickered into life.
Yep. Just had a bit of a power surge there, but what's happened there is the hydraulic rig has been switched on outside, which is connected to the aircraft, and that's given 3,000 psi.
Oh, just
to
there?
the hydraulic system there.
Yep, okay.
That's the brake pressure.
Yep.
You are now going to pull the undercarriage up by operating that handle, put it to the right and take it up. You'll see these lights, those three green lights there indicating that the landing gear is down and locked, which is what the pilot's looking for on his approach.
Yeah.
As soon as you hit that handle, those red lights will come on, and that's telling you the gear is travelling up. And when it gets to up and locked and it's all clean, all those lights go out.
Right then, so, ready?
Okay, right, we're about to pull the gear up. Gear up. Okay, you're clear
So
to
just
go.
pull it to the right.
Yep.
And up. Well, it's quite a thump, isn't it?
It is, that's it. That's it's breaking the geometric locks. That's your gear is travelling now.
Yeah.
That's the nose is up and locked. Left hand main is locked. Right hand main is locked. You're now configured for flying. The gear is all up. All the doors are closed. The aircraft's flush.
Should we put it down then?
You can put it down. I'll just let the guys on the outside know you're going to do that. Gear coming down. Gear down. Right, so if you select it down, that's the reg because the gear's travelling at the moment, it's coming down. Your nose is locked down.
Yeah.
Your right hand main is locked down, your left hand main is locked down.
Brilliant, Bob. Well, thank you very much indeed. I have really enjoyed my, albeit brief, glimpse into the rather elaborate and luxurious world of the private jet.
Before the world of private jets, Bournemouth Airport's first civilian flights were reserved for military VIPs and wealthy individuals. But with the drop in costs of air travel came the rise of the package holiday. And one holiday company in particular left its mark on Bournemouth Airport.
Bath Travel was formed by my grandfather, Reginald Ernest Bath, in 1924. And he had a single travel agency in Bournemouth. And in 1957, when R.E. Bath died, my father inherited that one travel agency, which he grew in the next 30, 40 years into Britain's biggest privately owned travel agency network. The following year, my father decided that it would be a good idea to have his own flights, and so he chartered a plane to fly from Bournemouth to Palma. But in those days, it was incredibly undeveloped. For example, there was only one hotel on Magaluf Beach called the Atlantic. Now there's 35,000 hotel beds in Palma Nova and Magaluf. So Peter Bath produced a very personal service. And in 1965, when we started the 111 jet flights from Bournemouth, he would write an individual letter to every passenger on the plane, and it would be put on the seats, and it was the lunch menu on the 111, and he said, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Shute, I hope you've enjoyed your holiday, and if anything's gone even slightly wrong, here's my number, tell me about it." And this was the kind of personal service which people loved, and the word-of-mouth recommendation that he got from dealing with every problem himself was extraordinary. As the tour operation grew, he started adding more destinations. April 21st, 1996, we flew a British Airways Concorde subsonically from Heathrow to Bournemouth with 100 passengers that were taken up that morning. We then put 100 passengers on and flew the aircraft supersonically out over the Atlantic for a champagne lunch. But the big thing was, it was a lovely sunny Sunday, and at least 25,000 people came out to the airport to see the historic first flight of Concorde in or out of Bournemouth. In the early days, people went for a holiday for a week or 2 weeks. By the time Ryanair and EasyJet came along 15, 20 years ago, flying daily services, people could go on any day of the week and come back on any other day of the week. So for the last 15 years of Palm Air's life, we were competing with low-cost carriers, and we had higher prices, and people could only go to Mallorca on a Wednesday, whereas with Ryanair they could go every day of the week. At the end of October 2010, we operated the last ever Palm Air flight, and it came back into Bournemouth, and the passengers were in tears, the stewardesses were in floods of tears because their job was finishing. But even the day that we finished, technically we were still Britain's favourite charter airline. In May 2009, we started Palm Air Australis with a ex-British Airways Boeing 737-500. Unfortunately, my father died in 2006 in December, so we immortalised him by naming the aircraft the Spirit of Peter Bath, and my mother initiated the naming ceremony at the airport. We invited hundreds of passengers to see the new aircraft being unveiled. He will be remembered by at least 150,000 local people who flew with him, often for 20 or 30 years, as a person who cared enough about his passengers that he saw off every flight that he possibly could. Without him, there would be no Bournemouth Airport today.
What was RAF Herne was created during the conflict of the Second World War, but unlike so many of its sister airfields, it survived and played a crucial role in the development of civil aviation. But I wonder how many people taking off on aircraft like that, heading away on holiday to the Mediterranean and beyond, really appreciate that they are flying in the vapour trails of those typhoons that left here for Normandy over 70 years ago.